Hello, everybody. It's good to see all of you. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and we're going to overlap with last week's time together. Beginning at verse 23, we're going to read into the chapter, which is verse 27. And let me remind you what Paul says in the verses immediately preceding verse 23. He talks about winning as many people as possible to Jesus Christ. That's the goal of his life, to win as many people as possible. And then he expresses his philosophy of ministry, the belief that he has about himself and his work that encapsulates or encompasses or brings together all that he was about in just one sentence. I have decided, Paul said, to become all things to all men, that by all possible means some might be saved. So Paul put himself into situations of the Jews, situations of the Gentiles, work with both cultures, being like them to the point that he would not take in their disobedience to God or whatever sin they were committing, but he would use the language and the style of ministry that would reach them where they were. That was Paul's whole life. If we pick up again in verse 23, which overlaps, I'm going to stop almost immediately and give a better translation. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. What Paul was saying was that I don't want to be all talk. I also want to be action. Let me say it even differently. Remember all hat, no cattle? Remember that? I don't want to be all hat, no cattle. Don't be all talk, no action. Say it differently, to say it even better. I want to get into the lives of the people around me and in practical ways reach them. Do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessing, that I may get into the lives of people and reach them. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games. Now, let me stop for a moment. The most famous athletic competition in ancient Greek was called the Olympics. It still is called the Olympics. But in Corinth, they had the second most famous games called the Isthmian Games. Corinth was located on a little stretch of land between northern Greece and southern Greece. That's called an isthmus. And so every 2 years, all the great athletes from around Greece would come together and they would compete in the Isthmian Games. They would run, they'd box, they'd wrestle, they'd throw stuff, all the things that athletes do. And it's interesting that Paul, like most men, fall right into a sports analogy. Every time I use a sports analogy like golf, for example, people's eyes glaze over. I wonder if Paul had the same experience. Anyway, only one gets the prize. Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They discipline themselves. They do it to get a crown that will not last. The crown for the Isthmian Games, they did not get money. They were not paid a salary. The crown for the Isthmian Games is made of a combination of pine needles and celery leaves. Wow. I'm going to work for that. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. Now, I'm going to give you a term. It's good theology. It's what theologians talk about when they talk about Jesus. I know it's kind of a hard thing to grab a hold of, but let me just give you the term. The term is incarnational. One of the bedrock beliefs we have is in the incarnation. Now, that means in the flesh. So, God came in the flesh in Jesus. God is very difficult to understand, very difficult. Moses, as many characters in Scripture, asked to see God or have experience with God. And he said, God, listen, I've been serving you all this time. Let me see you. And God said, no one can see me and live. And what I'll tell you what I'll do, Moses. I'll put you up on this rock, and you can hide behind it. And when I'm passing, you can see my backside. That is not a literal translation, but it's close. So God was saying, you can only see the backside of me. You cannot look at my face and live, because God is very powerful, beyond our ability to understand. And so He made it simple for us. Jesus became one of us. God became flesh. That's the incarnation. Now, Paul said, my philosophy of ministry is an incarnational philosophy. What I want to do is, I want to become all things to all people that some might be saved. I want to get into their life. I want to understand who they are. I want to see where they're coming from. I want to experience their life where they are, so that I can speak to them in ways that they can grab a hold of. So I want to become one of them. Yesterday I went to the Apple store at MacArthur Mall to have my phone repaired before I go on vacation. And I dropped the VCR. Do you remember VCRs? It's been a long time. Well, I was looking at some recordings of early years in our church. I was on videotape, and I had a whole pile of stuff taken to my staff meeting to show the staff some of these old videos, and I dropped the VCR on top of my phone, and it broke the screen. So I went to the Apple store yesterday. I ran into 3 church families at the Apple store. Maybe I ran into you. The place was packed. The Apple store at MacArthur Mall is the busiest store out of all those stores. Not a very large store, but the busiest store in the entire mall. Of course, there's not much of the mall left, if you know what I'm talking about. A lot of the stores are closing there. So I'm sitting there watching people, waiting for my phone to be repaired. I saw people my age, you know. Men my age tend to dress alike. T-shirt, summertime now, T-shirt, shorts, flip-flops. Sometimes a baseball cap. Now, even though they're men my age, and even though they're dressing like most men my age do, I don't own a pair of shorts. Who wants to see my legs? That's my philosophy. I don't have any flip-flops either. I have shower shoes, but they actually go all around my foot, so you can't even see my feet in the shower. Okay. So I'm not even like the men my age. But then I'm watching young adults come in. I'm watching how these young adults, probably not young adults that go to church, most likely not. And I'm looking at them. One lovely girl, her entire head was tattooed. It was beautiful work. Someone asked me this after the service this morning, you mean if we want to reach young adults, we got to get tattoos? They were kidding me. I said, well, I have a tattoo right here. It's a freckle. I have a freckle tattoo. Okay, all right, I'm dealing with that kind of crowd, I see, okay. No, I'm not saying you have to get tattoos. Tattoos are okay, it's all right. But all I'm doing is noticing the culture. And I know that a lot of Christians, a lot of people who are church people, look at people who are not church people, and they look down on them or askance at them. Lottie Moon, who is our hero missionary, Southern Baptist missionary back in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, worked in China. We have an offering named after her every year. She went to China from Richmond, Virginia, and when she went to China, thought that the Chinese were savages. So she could maintain her Western dress. She maintained eating Western food. She lived in a Western-style house. She had very limited contact with the Chinese people because she found it disgusting. She was there for 7 years and didn't win a single person to Jesus. I wonder why. And it began to happen, it occurred to her, she was revolutionary. It began to occur to her that Chinese people were people just like her. The only difference was place, geography, culture. And so she learned the Chinese language. She began to dress in Chinese clothes, lived in a Chinese house. She even began to eat Kung Pao chicken, which, if you know, is not really very Chinese, not really very Chinese. And when she began to eat Chinese food and dress like a Chinese person and speak Chinese language, her ministry took off. She was in a city of several millions in the middle of nowhere, and soon her church was many thousand people because she got into where they were and lived how they were. She became all things to all people that some might be saved. So I'm sitting in the Apple store, I'm thinking about this. They have an online ministry. That's a tool, that's good, but it's nowhere near enough for us to be able to reach for Jesus, all these wonderful people who maybe never have gone to church before. It requires people like you and me to get into the lives of people around us and to share their life with them. It's incarnational. Now, in saying this is tough. It's very difficult to take on the culture of someone else. It really is. And so Paul expresses how he does it. And he does it through discipline. Discipline. He understands what the whole thing's about, how he's being tested, and what is happening in his life and his ministry. So he disciplines himself. He says that in a race, all the runners run, they win a prize. And he says it very matter-of-factly, very straightforwardly, and I love how Paul gets right down to the nub or the center of what he's talking about. He says, run in order to win the prize. You're in a race, run to win a prize. And that race is to become part of the culture around you, to become useful to God to reach other people. Now you can say, if you start analyzing this, well, in a race, they run to win a prize, but only one person wins. So you have all these Christians, and only one of us is going to get the prize. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, now this is very important. This is the most important thing I'm going to say to you today. You're going to get this, right? You're going to get this. You're running your race. And you're running to reach your prize. So God has given you a life in Him. He's given you something to do. Paul knew what his was, to be a message to the Gentiles about Jesus. He's given you something for you to do. You discover that thing, and then you run so you'll win your prize, because one day you're not running for celery leaves and pine needles. You're running for an eternal crown. You're going to stand in front of God. He's going to look at you, and He's going to say to you either, you fell short, or He's going to say, well done, my faithful servant. And He'll give you the reward that's due for the life that you've lived for Him. So he understood his race. You understand your race. You understand you're running for your prize, and your prize is different. Your prize is unique from anybody else's. Now, I have come over a period of time to recognize I'm running my race, and I'm trying to get my prize. And I did not always understand that. And I want you to listen. I want you to listen. This is kind of difficult to grab a hold of. Modern Christianity, affected by American culture, looks at our faith as being the attainment of what is best for us. Now, I don't mean to criticize any other ministry or preacher. My belief is, you're for Jesus, I'm for you. Or to say it differently, they're not against us, they're for us. It's Jesus' own teaching. I don't mean to criticize this. And I think this kind of teaching has a place. It has a benefit for some people. But if it's taken as being the whole thing about Christianity, it's wrong. I want you to listen. Your race is not to become a champion. Your race is not to have your best life now. Your race is not for yourself to be healthy and wealthy all the time. That's not your race. The great majority of believers throughout all of history have been punished for their faith. They've had horrible lives because of their faith. They got to the end of their lives and received their prize, having suffered a great deal. Even Paul was beaten, jailed, left for dead. He gave up everything to be able to serve his Savior and Master. The great majority of Christians right now who are alive are suffering because of their faith. People are dying. They're in prison right now. In this world we live in now, 2019, because of the faith. China has, now, you know, I don't want to get political here, but our president is putting tariffs on China, and there's all kind of controversy about this. But if it was up to me, if I was king of America, I would not do one bit of importation or sell anything to China. They have millions of people in real concentration camps because of their faith. You want to lose your job in China? Become a Christian. They're bulldozing churches in China. Every Chinese person gets a score called a social score. And if you're a Christian, your score is very low. That's the way it is in China. So I said, a while ago I was being very arrogant about myself and how I was. Earlier in my life, I thought that what God wanted me to do with my ministry was become successful and well-known, influential. I went to a small church out of seminary. It started out a very small church. When I left, it was a medium-sized church. And all the time I was there, I convinced myself I was a V8 engine in a 4-cylinder church. There's a very famous poem called Gray's Elegy. It's one of the most depressing poems you could ever read. He's standing in the cemetery thinking about all these dead people around him. It starts off great, doesn't it? It's wonderful. But he says in the middle of the poem, that this, and I would quote this to myself, how many roses bloom and blush and waste their fragrance on the desert air. I was the rose that was blooming and blushing, and I was wasting all my fragrance, my talents on the desert air, that little small church. And I convinced myself what God wanted me to do was to reach my best life now. Are you getting this, right? You're getting this. So, for me, my faith was self-actualization. Now, I was thinking about this last year. I had cardiac arrest. And the EMTs put 200 joules, it's a measurement of power, work, into my heart and got it beating again in the correct rhythm. And that weekend, I was reading in the hospital, in the newspaper, online newspaper, of a pastor in Africa of a church went into the river close by his church to baptize 100 people, which is pretty cool, right? I think next Sunday we're baptizing 10 people, which is wonderful. I'll miss it. I'll watch it online. Anyway, he was going to baptize 100 people. He baptized the first person, and then a crocodile attacked him, and he died from the injuries. And I started thinking to myself, I have a heart attack, and I live, and this guy is doing a work, a ministry far better, far greater than anything I've ever done in a place that nobody knows about, and he's attacked and dies. And it made no sense to me. I mean, evil's a very random thing. It still makes no sense to me. But I know this, that I'm not all that. I'm not that important. And my life is not to become, in this life, successful. My life is to run my race, my individual personal race, and grab my prize. Are you seeing this for yourself? You need to discover your gift and your place of service and ministry. I'll be talking in future weeks about what 1 Corinthians says about spiritual gifting, so you can understand your gift and your place of ministry and what God wants you to do, what race He wants you to run. But when you discover what God wants you to do, it requires an immense discipline in order to be able to do it. And Paul said, I punish my body. I don't run like a runner in the Isthmian Games, who when they fire the pistol, oh, they didn't have pistols back then. I guess they threw a spear. Okay, I'm cracking myself up. It's all right. So they start the race, the 100-yard dash, throws a spear. And they run it. And again, he doesn't run like this. He doesn't run aimlessly. He sees the track laid out before him, the runner. He sees the tape ahead of him, and he runs towards that tape with discipline. Boxers have always shadow boxed to practice their skills, or maybe, I think, in modern times, put on a show. Look how good I am, with the shadow boxing. Paul said, I don't shadow box, pretend to fight. I actually hit myself. Now, he's not talking about a physical pain he's enduring. He's talking about making himself do the things he has to do to get out of himself and into people's lives. That's what he does. So that, he says, I can become all things to all people, that some might be saved. My race is not about me becoming famous, Paul said, or reaching my best life now, or never being sick and always being wealthy. My life is about this thing that Jesus gave me to do. I'm trying to do it. Let me read you the last verse now. I myself, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. And what Paul is saying is that when I get to heaven one day and face God, I want to get that reward. I want Him to say to me, well done. That's what I want. That's what I'm aiming for. He's not talking about preaching and serving and ministry, and then at the very last moment, God pulls the rug out from underneath of him and he loses his salvation. He's not talking about that. He's talking about the context of running this race, becoming all things to all people, fulfilling the mission that God gave him to do. And what he's saying here is that I have to use my gift or lose my gift. I've got to be doing what He called me to do, or I'll lose everything that He ever gave me. I haven't done what He called me to do. Paul, I'm taking this very seriously. I had a good friend. You know cars have lifespans. Did you know this? And that lifespan is independent of, mostly, how many miles it has on the car. So you can have a car with 200,000 miles on it and it run like and look like new. But because cars are made out of material, stuff, metal and rubber and silicone, vinyl, there's all kinds of fluids inside of a car, the brake fluid, the transmission fluid, whatever. That as a car gets older, it begins to fall apart on its own. So the tires fall apart, the hoses fall apart. When you restore a car, you got to replace all of them. Anyway, I had a good friend, and she started dating a guy that her father didn't like. Now, let me fill some more of the backstory in. He had given her, her father had given her a Thunderbird. Now, I got to explain what a Thunderbird is, okay? It's a car. Originally, Ford made the car to compete with the Corvette, but it had more of a boulevard reputation. So a Corvette was actually fast, could turn corners really quick, but in a Thunderbird, you looked good when you drove it. It had the big white sidewalls on it, you know, and you go up and down the boulevard, up and down Virginia Beach Boulevard or down towards the ocean front, just back and forth. And back when it was legal to do this, you can't do it anymore. But, you know, people look at you and they go, yeah, you're so cool. So she had a Thunderbird, a T-Bird. They were called T-Birds. How many of you have any recognition of what I'm talking about? Okay, good. I was really worried. I really was. I'm getting old, you know, so who knows what goes out of style. But anyway, it's a T-Bird. And so she started dating a guy her dad didn't like. And he took the Thunderbird away. Yes, she had fun, 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 until Daddy took the T-Bird away. That's a Beach Boys song, but this has actually happened. She had a Thunderbird, starts dating a guy that her dad doesn't like. He takes the Thunderbird away. Well, she ends up marrying the guy, and the guy is a great fellow. He becomes a firefighter. He becomes a fire captain, a fire chief. They have 3 children. He's a wonderful man. He goes to church. He's a deacon, everything. But his dad still doesn't like him. If she had married Billy Graham, her dad wouldn't have liked the guy. Plus, Billy had been a little old for her. But anyway. So he wouldn't give the car back. He put it in the garage, and it sat there for 30 years, give or take a year, until her dad passed on to whatever reward he passed on to. And then she was able to reclaim the car. Now, I saw the car. It had been almost new when she put it in the garage. The tires, the white sidewall tires, are dry rotted. All the hosing was gone, just gone. It had large rust spots on it. The vinyl, the roll and pleated vinyl interior was all cracked and broken. The car was virtually worthless except to be sold for restoration. Are you with me now? So that for a lot of people, their faith is simply to go to heaven. I believe in Jesus. I'm going to go to heaven someday. Or maybe their faith has become for them a way for people to pay attention to them. See me, look at me, look what I do. Look, I'm famous. Look, yeah. But as a result of this, what happens, because you haven't been used for the right purpose, eventually you become not what you were supposed to be. This beautiful T-Bird, you know, driving up and down the boulevard. Instead, you become a rusted, old heap of junk. never used by God. And yeah, you have your salvation, you have forgiveness, you're going to go to heaven someday, but when you get there, you'll have this regret that you were never able to be used by God to be all things to all people, that some might be saved.